Hey everyone, my guest today is Zach Heinzerling, who is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. Zach began his career at HBO working on documentaries and also for the show 24/7. Then he went on to direct and shoot his own film, Cutie and the Boxer, which was nominated for the 2014 Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. The film also won a 2015 Emmy Award for Best Feature Documentary, and then he was enlisted by Beyoncé Knowles-Carter to direct the five-part web series self-titled for her album Beyoncé. He then went on to direct the critically acclaimed six-part series McCartney 321, starring Sir Paul McCartney and Rick Rubin for Hulu. He then went on to direct the docu-series Stolen Youth Inside the Cult of Sarah Lawrence. And most recently, I got to meet him and see him at the premiere for his four-part Netflix series called Rafa, which highlights the life and career of one of the most extraordinary tennis players, Rafa Nadal. And Zach, it's just extraordinary the number of lanes you have traveled and sort of deep dived into through your work. And I was telling you before we started, I'm just such a fan. I just think you're so extraordinarily talented. So thank you for spending time with me and my listeners today.
Thanks for having me. It's a very kind introduction and excited to chat.
Well, I just want to go back because um, I'm curious, as an artist, how you found yourself. Was it a choice, or did you just happen into the world of documentary, or was it something you always loved?
I I'm not one of those directors who like at age 5 was shooting with a Super 8 camera. I in college started to appreciate narrative films, but more as a viewer. I took a contemporary Russian cinema class and was watching Tarkovsky films. And there was something to the art of cinema that was attractive to me. And my senior year, I took a documentary course. We watched, it was actually a documentary of the Holocaust. Survey taught by a German professor, and we just watched a lot of interesting formal documentaries. Showa, of course, which is this 9 hour film trying to sort of explain what happened, and Night and Fog, and others that were lesser known, but that were trying to do something, finding truth in a story through a sort of formally inventive filmmaking, which to me I think was attractive at trying to, documentary lends itself to kind of an exploration because it's a slightly newer form of cinema in which you can kind of there are rules and then you break rules and then we see series of films that have done different things in documentary, whether it's more fictional, more observational, more subjective, more of a hybrid. There's the term is sort of a catch-all. There's reality and then there's more. So it felt like an attractive place, but I hadn't taken any kind of production classes. At my senior year of college, I went on a study abroad program to Israel, and part of the program was to make a documentary about a coexistence program between Palestinian and Israeli youth. And while I was there, there was a producer from HBO shooting a TV documentary series about the same organization. Um, and his name is Ezra Edelman, who, as I'm sure a lot of the viewers know, was the director of the OJ series that won an Oscar, and the director of the Prince documentary, which never came out. But Ezra is a brilliant filmmaker, and I basically moved to New York, and the third day I was there, Ezra hired me as a PA on his first documentary that he was working on, which was a documentary about the Brooklyn Dodgers baseball team. So I got lucky, I think, with the timing. I had an interest in the genre, certainly an interest in film, and Ezra sort of became a mentor, for my first few years out of college. And I think in documentary, it allows you to learn as you're doing, because you don't need the apparatus of a narrative film. So you can go out and shoot and record sound and some of the things that feel kind of hard or like you might need an education in as a young filmmaker. Documentary somehow lowers those and allows you to kind of do those jobs yourself. So that was sort of the start for me at HBO. And then I made Cutie and the Boxer while I was there, and that sort of took my career off.
Okay, I just watched it last night. So something that is like in in your rear view mirror in a big way at this point. Obviously, it was so impactful in terms of a jumping off point for this beautiful career. But you're talking to someone who learned about this couple in the last 24 hours and fell so deeply in love with them that I even had to immediately Google if they were still alive because they were so present for me, and remarkably they are. And there was something about it, even if you don't love or know who the Pennebakers are or certain well-known doc makers, Grey Gardens, right? Like most people, that's a very successful commercial. I mean, it found its audience later. But there was something about this couple in a strange way that reminded me of that film because they're eccentric and incredibly compelling and gold, right, for a documentary filmmaker. Can you talk a little bit? And I promise we're going to talk about Rafa. It's the most incredible series and it's much more present for you. And I think you were just at Wimbledon, so we'll talk tennis. But how did you meet Ushio and Norco, and how did they become so happy to have you be their roommate, basically, for what feels like a long time?
Yeah, it's a great story. I mean, I feel like they sort of represent this last of a dying breed of the kind of romanticized idea of the downtown artist that in New York in the 60s and 70s was very prevalent. And now, of course, the neighborhoods that they live in, like Dumbo and Soho, are vastly different than they were. But somehow Ushio and Noriko maintain this lifestyle. They live in this loft apartment that somehow hasn't been taken over by some, landlord who then turns it into a condo. And it's falling apart and decrepit and basically the deal is he won't fix anything, and as a result, he doesn't really raise the rent. But somehow that's still lasted actually to this day. I mean, it's crazy. We're talking in 2026. The movie was made and it came out in 2013. Um, and it's they are timeless in every sense. Somehow the same feeling that I had in 2013, which is wow, look at these they've survived in this way and they're the last of the dying breed of the downtown artist and timeless. The same story could be told in 2026, which is so remarkable. But yeah, I do feel like it's so rare that you meet individuals like that who just, no matter what they do or what their story is, are fascinating to watch. I think it's,
Also extraordinarily talented art. I mean, they are beautiful artists, each in their own right. Like their work is really compelling and incredible. Um, Wait, can you go back? How did you actually meet them?
so a friend of mine who at the time was a photographer had just seen them on the street and had taken photos of them and showed me the photos and he was like, we should go back. And he had studied in Japan and spoke some Japanese. And so the two of us kind of started the film together. And he's the main producer on the film, Patrick Burns. Um, but anyway, we just started hanging out with him. I think we were, 22, 23 at the time. We would ride our bikes over to Dumbo. We lived in Williamsburg and, sometimes bring the camera, sometimes not. They had this sort of, library of art books. We were both interested in art. And they would cook these, elaborate sushi meals, and we would bring over, food and desserts, and it was this, beautiful, strange friendship that slowly developed into a film. I was doing the first. This was the first film I had ever made. Um, and so it was a long 2 to 3 years of sort of figuring out what the story is. And then Noriko sort of became, the central, dramatic piece of the story when she sort of comes out as an artist in her own right, and sort of Ushio is left in her shadow to deal with the competitiveness of a relationship of two artists. But it's I look back and think about how hard it would be to make that documentary today. Of course they are brilliant artists, but they are not well-known artists. So the idea of I think it's something you can only do when you're young, right? Just take a risk and film a random artist couple with not much notoriety. Certainly, we were not going to get, funding for this from, a studio or something. It
Right,
was do it yourself through and through. I filmed and did sound and basically it didn't cost anything but my time while I was still working at HBO
right,
to make it. And I just think that kind of risk taking and that kind of documentary, which, yes, you mentioned the Pennebakers, they're a massive inspiration for, just finding something and following it and having the kind of patience, and, I think in the Pennebakers case, the confidence that their treatment of the subject was going to turn out to be interesting. That the film Grey Gardens is as much about the Maisel brothers as it is the characters. It's about the relationship between the Maisels and the subject, and they're able to, pull out the most interesting and highlight the sort of quirky, eccentric parts of these characters that someone else may miss or may, not think is interesting enough for a film. So yeah, I think it was a beautiful experience and one that has been kind of impossible to replicate since in
right.
my career.
Well, I felt like to your point, that's what happened in this film. Um, Obviously they trusted you and loved you. It's such an intimate movie and it's so beautiful. I mean, I can't think of anything. There are others that might equal sort of what it is to be an artist. Um, but there's a way in which you have, it's such a love letter to this couple and it's such a love letter to an artist's life and asks the question like what is it to be an artist? And the idea that after you made this extraordinary film about this couple who really never got out of poverty, even though they produced like the extraordinary amount of work that, there's a scene where someone from the Guggenheim is coming and trying to figure out like, can we get the Guggenheim involved? To then go to Beyonce, I think is such a wild ride because here you have these examples of people who are so talented, and yet this person breaks through in a commercial way, um, and yet works with the same depth and passion and non-commercial values as the Shinoharas do, right? So I wondered if you could talk about that, like what a segue, right? What a career segue.
Yeah, it is interesting. I feel like artists are artists, and I appreciate craft and uh, thought and the process of making something, and whether it's Beyonce's album or Ushio's boxing painting, there's a way of finding your lens and seeing these as portraits of artists, that I feel like you hone in on and you find, where do they get their creative inspiration from? What makes this person interesting? What do they have to say? What's their point of view? I think the transition was strange in the sense of being around Beyonce. There was just this aura, that she has that is intimidating. But also, once you sort of get through the layers of her, managers and protectors, she's, as you can imagine, incredibly thoughtful, kind, and articulate, and interested in the same sorts of things I would be interested in, process wise, and wanting to talk about the things that, I always feel like there's such an interest in celebrities and, you know, what drama is this song about, or probably the relationship stuff with Jay-Z, or the sort of extracurriculars. But what the artist typically wants to talk about is like how they made the record, and that particular documentary was very much how they made it, and the idea that she had holed up in this house and had recorded, basically had these videos of her recording studio, and Pharrell was there, and the kind of aha moments and those sorts of things, again, similarly with the McCartney 321, it's very much about how the songs are made. There's elements of, yes, McCartney's childhood and Lennon's and that kind of thing, but like the heart of those pieces is finding what the artist is passionate about, and makes them alive, because when Beyonce creates music, it's the music that's speaking for her. She's not often sort of the subject of sort of creating the spectacle just from her interview,
Right.
so it's finding what, like, actually, and with McCartney, he was so excited by hearing his songs. That was the first time they had been played ever as stems, so the isolated instruments. So he was so excited about hearing the stems after hearing the songs for so many years, that excitement generated this like fever, which was sort of like gives you an insight of the fever and the excitement of like creating the song, and then and that energy between Rick and Paul is the essence of that piece, or what the spark is. So. I don't know. I think that there's you sort of have to just find what it is that is going to make this interesting, and it's never probably what you drew up in your pitch, or what you thought it was going to be.
Was that part of with Beyonce and McCartney and Rubin? Were those things that someone came to you having seen your previous work and asked you to do, or sort of like an actor, do you audition for the gig in some way? Maybe those two things were completely different, but what is the process for a director?
Yeah, it depends. Those two projects, actually, yes, someone came to me. I mean, different people came to me with the ideas. And Beyonce, I had, someone had seen Cutie and the Boxer. I think it was shortly after Cutie and the Boxer. And we did that. And then with Rick, yeah, Rick's producer had seen some of my work, and Rick was sort of trying to come up with, you know, how do I he knew that it was a conversation with Paul, but like, what does it look like, and how do we structure it, and like, should it just be a conversation, or should there be, other elements involved? So it was part of like creating the you know what is this conversation, and how do we show it and share it? What's the best way to do that process? But with yeah, with Stolen Youth. It was my agent at the time had the article, the article that was written about the kids was optioned, and this agency was had sent it to a few directors, and then one of the main subjects of the article and the documentary basically interviewed a few different directors,
Right.
and ultimately, I guess, chose me. Um, yeah, and then Cutie obviously was just, us finding something and pursuing it. So, Um, I think that you're going to have the best um, or the closest product to your vision is going to be if you come up with the idea and you sort of pursue it independently. Um, I think when it's coming from elsewhere, you usually are, following some kind of supervision, whether it be the subject or the studio or production company.
Do you have
But
any sense about what it is about you when you think about your personality? If you have a sense of your own, do you have a sense of your own personality?
hmm. Yeah, I think, well, I have a sense of what people have said to me about what might make me good at what I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
What are some of those things that
yeah,
have been said to you?
I think that I'm a calm presence, and typically I like to shoot a lot of my own stuff, so I sort of don't create a large distraction. So if I can be as small, whether it's me with the camera and one sound guy, or sometimes I'm doing sound. I like to make myself invisible and be around in a way that doesn't feel awkward, that doesn't feel like there's this, tension. So usually that involves, spending time. I can use Rafa as an example.
Yeah.
We got to spend time with him and his team traveling around the world as he was on the tour. And a lot of that time was having dinner or, watching TV or some of the things that I wouldn't necessarily get to do if we were just at his house in Mallorca, but because there was this travel and he was there with his team, I was sort of folded in as a part of the team, and the people that were on my team gelled nicely. And so there were opportunities to talk about things other than the documentary. And then when somebody gets to know you as a person, then the trust is built. And from there, yeah, it becomes, um, how do you sort of get what you want dramatically, in a
Does that happen
way?
more in the edit? Like, do you, in a way, with like, let's talk about Rafa because it's so fantastic. And you had, I mean, it's not like Rafa isn't used to being filmed, right? Tennis players are filmed all the time. Remarkably, there was footage of him as a kid because he was a really uniquely gifted kid. But what was so beautiful about this film is his family, which his uncle, I mean, obviously his family is also really involved in his profession, but it really feels like we're spending time not just with this extraordinary tennis player, but with his whole world. So, not to get like super in the weeds with you, but Roth's pitched this idea. It's kind of now or never. Sadly, we knew he was coming to making a decision about how much longer he would play. But like on day one, like literally, when you're introduced to someone who's being pitched this idea that's new to them, and it's you who would potentially do it. Like what does that, do you kind of sit down with him and say, if we were to do this, this is how I see it? Do you sort of start working right away? Like, can you just tell me what it literally looks like at the beginning?
Yeah, well, I will say that I don't think Rafa ever really wanted to do the documentary. It wasn't him pitching it. His team had sort of convinced him that because it was his last year, that he should do something. David Ellison, who at the time was just running Skydance, which was a production company, um, had known Rafa from the Indian Wells tournament, and I had known producers at Skydance through my
Right.
work at HBO. Anyway, so I got the call, and it was basically like, can you go to Australia in 2 weeks to potentially film this documentary? We don't know if it's a series, it's a feature. And they didn't say you have the job. It was basically like, if Rafa likes you, you can continue. Which I've never been in that situation of, going fully into a project, but knowing that I didn't, I could, that there was this like audition aspect, that I both was trying to make something good and pursue a vision, but it couldn't get too far ahead of myself, because I also had this sort of like appease Rafa and make a good impression aspect. So it was a strange position to be in, and so when I got to Australia, we just started filming almost immediately, because he was starting to play, and this was his comeback. So we wanted to make sure we were there for the first match, um, which was in Brisbane, Australia, which was a tune-up tournament for the Australian Open. And we had a conversation the first day before we started filming, but it was not like about what this documentary is. It was very much about how is he feeling about returning to tennis, me sort of getting like a gut check and his um, you know ambitions for the season, almost more of a reporter journalist situation. And then I got to go out to dinner with him and his team and his family for New Year's Eve, which gave us a chance to sort of, talk about kids and things not tennis related. Um, but I will say, like that first, the thing that created the bond between us on that first trip was Rafa got injured 5 or 6 days into the shoot, and an injury that basically, you know, he had been out for a year rehabbing his hip, and then he re-injures his hip. And so it was really devastating for him. And I worked my way into the car right after the news of this MRI, the news of him not being able to play was delivered, and it was just him and I in the car, and he was very emotional and sort of tearing up. And I think the fact that I was there to witness him in this very vulnerable situation, it creates this kind of bond, that it's an unspoken thing where like Rafa knows that I've seen him in this intimate space. So like the sort of ice is broken, at that point, and I'm in, whether he chose me or not, I'm not sure. He allowed me to film this. I filmed it in a way um where he was able to sort of be himself. Um and after that, I couldn't see him being like, "Oh, let's find somebody else," because one of the most emotional things that happened right away and I had captured it. So in a way, capturing that moment, it's like capturing his essence. And so now that essence is a part of this project. Um, and getting rid of me would be getting rid of that. Or I needed to sort of stay in the trusted circle of this project and continue to make sure that that moment was treated carefully. So it's things like that. I think that it's strange things that always where there are problems potentially, and it's how you react to the problem
Right.
that shows the other person whether they can trust you or not. Because everybody can talk about their kids and, BS about, weather, tennis, or whatever. But it's always these times when you're not necessarily expecting it, where it's your reaction to something that is very telling, and sort of clues them into, oh, like, you know, maybe they're not trying to manipulate me to get to this part of the story. Maybe they
Right.
are interested in telling the story that I feel like is the real me. They're not sort of seeking, the over dramatic, salacious version or whatever it is. But that was one of those moments.
You develop such intimate relationships the way you work, right? Like that's the nature of documentary. People aren't learning lines and going home and coming back to set the next day. Like it's this really ongoing. How do you, when you've been so immersed in the Nadal world and family during like one of the most emotional times in his life, or when, when you see Norco like get her show, right? Or Beyonce like unveiling to you like this is what was going on in my life and this is what this song is and this is why. How is it to say goodbye to these families that you've entered? And then it's like a doctor going through like a really intense treatment with someone and the patient lives and then they go on and like what do you do with that when you finish?
It's a good question. I think it depends with each, subject. I still am in touch with the Shinoharas. I probably see them maybe once a year. There are people from Stolen Youth that I'm still in touch with. But also there's an understanding. You have to sort of create some sort of boundary of the relationship. You're the filmmaker, and this is their life. And there's a knowledge that when, that what you're doing is for the purpose of this film and to be, publicized. So I think that, you know, with Rafa, um, I honestly think it was hardest to say bye to his wife. I felt the closest to her in terms of just a sort of shared sense of you know, respect or I gravitated towards her kindness and softness and rawness and that she allowed us, and she had never done an on-camera interview ever.
Right.
Um, and I think that there was again that bond when you ask certain questions and that person responds. They may never have been asked those questions. It's in a sense kind of like a therapy session. And when they have an emotional reaction or breakthrough, again, there's a bond that's created. So I actually felt like I had that more maybe with Rafa's wife. Rafa, as you said, is quite used to the media. But there was just something about like um, you do develop friendships with individuals, and it's hard. It can be hard to say goodbye and move on. Um, and I think I would imagine a lot of directors, though, would say that, yeah, it is very important to sort of have those boundaries where everyone realizes, what it is, but you also can't help, liking some of the people that
Right,
that
right.
you're spending lots of time with, so there's always one or two from each project that I'll,
The keepers.
text and
Yeah.
stay in touch with Felicia Rosario from Stolen Youth. Who yeah, I was just such a part of such an emotional, crazy time in her life. And she's such an interesting person that, I want to support and sort of be around and hear from and um but also you have to move on.
Before I let you go, I mean, I think about, the number of hours you've spent with Paul McCartney, but McCartney or Beyonce or Rafa. Are there things, are there takeaways that you've sort of being around sort of,
Well, I will say I spent the most time with Rafa of those three by far. The
yeah,
the McCartney thing was a 2 day shoot, and Beyonce, one day. I will say, I definitely learned the most from Rafa. He has an integrity, and just a confidence about his sort of moral compass, and how he moves through the world that is, it's beautiful, infectious, inspirational, all the things. I will say at the French Open, when they had honored him, the year after he retired, he had a party for all of his friends in the same hotel that they always went to, the Intercontinental in Paris, every year. And they always had this party after, the French Open, usually after he had won it. and his family and his friends are all there, and it's late at night usually because it would be this thing happened into the evening, and so I was filming the party, and it was probably like 1 or maybe 1:30 in the morning, and Rafa's still there, talking to all of his friends, and I was like, Rafa, like, why don't you go to bed? Like, why are you still here? Like, he basically lives with his friends and family
Right,
too. They're all in
right,
Mallorca. He sees all these people all the time. Um, and he said, Zach, you come, you should know this about me, but, um, you know, this isn't for me. This isn't about me. This is about them.
right.
And they've come here, to celebrate me, so I owe it to them, to stay and as long as they stay, because it's not about me. And it was just like a really touching, you know, you just imagine every modern day celebrity being like, I just want to get out of here. This is dumb. Like I need to,
Yeah,
go uh, go to bed or do whatever. But Rafa's just very unique in that regard, and just taking himself out of the center, and realizing what a privilege it is to be him and to have these people come to celebrate him and his feeling of service and gratitude and thanking them by being there, was very striking to me.
that's really beautiful. That kind of humility is really beautiful. Okay, before I let you go, is there a little known fact about Zachary Heinzerling that you could share?
Well, yeah, I would say it's little known. My middle name um, is Xenor, which sounds kind of like extraterrestrial or something. But it's actually my grandmother's maiden name. But my parents chose it because it starts with a Z because they were hippies and they thought it'd be really cool if I had two Z's in my initials for some reason. So my nickname growing up was Xenor. But it's always to me felt like some kind of alien alter ego.
Well, I look forward to seeing the work that Xenor does in the future. Zach, thank you for doing this. This was great. Enjoy the rest of your
Thank you.
day, and I'll see you. I'll be there Saturday, so I'm sure we'll bump into each other at some point
Great.
on the island.
All right. Awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you. Nice
Thank
to
you
see you.
so much. Have the best day.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Bye.